In 1774, Louis XVI ascended to the French throne, a monarch burdened with the weight of expectations. At just 20 years old, he inherited a fractured nation, teetering on the brink of chaos. France had long been a symbol of splendor and culture, but beneath the gilded facade lay festering discontent. The 7 Years' War and costly ventures had drained the royal coffers, leaving a nation in financial ruin. The king and his advisors understood the enormity of the problem, yet Louis remained unprepared. He hoped that a simple restructuring of the monarchy would stem the tide of unrest. Louis trusted his traditional advisors, men who had served the grandeur of past kings. But these advisors, steeped in outdated strategies, could not see the gathering storm. The land was rife with inequality. The aristocracy thrived, while the Third Estate, the common people, struggled under the burden of heavy taxes. By 1780, the discontent bubbled to the surface. Food prices soared. Bread became a luxury. The king, however, lived lavishly in the Palace of Versailles, a world away from the suffering subjects outside its walls. His indifference became a glaring fault. Advisors warned him of the public's anger, yet he dismissed their concerns, convinced that the nobility's support could weather the storm. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. As the years passed, the financial crisis deepened. Louis attempted to reform the tax system, dubbing the notion of taxing the privileged class, but the proposal met fierce opposition. His ministers languished in indecision. His reliance on the old guard became a crutch, eroding the monarchy's credibility. Louis remained ensconced in a world of opulence, hosting extravagant parties, while France's citizens struggled to survive. By 1788, a catastrophic winter struck, devastating crops and exacerbating food shortages. The outcry grew louder. In the cities, tensions simmered. The monarchy's failings became impossible to ignore. Faced with mounting pressure, Louis finally summoned the Estates General in 1789, a decision that would prove fateful. The Third Estate, invigorated by the promise of representation, seized the opportunity to voice their frustrations. What was initially a tool for the monarchy's control morphed into a stage for revolutionary fervor. As the cries for justice echoed through the streets of Paris, the king, still isolated in his ivory tower, failed to recognize the shifting tide. He continued to hope that the crowds, fueled by hunger and anger, would dissipate and return to their mundane lives. Instead, the revolution began to gain momentum, and Louis found himself the prisoner of his own inaction. The Great Hall of Mirrors would soon witness not reflections of opulence, but the stark realities of a monarchy unraveling. The betrayal lurked close at hand. Those whom Louis trusted most prepared to turn against him. Unbeknownst to him, each day brought whispers of revolt, where plots brewed among the very ranks he believed would defend him. As rumors of functional disarray crackled in the air, the monarchy's grip weakened. Could Louis discern the message being sent from the streets? Or was he too far removed to save himself from the doom that approached? The echoes of history beckon as the question looms: would the walls of Versailles stand against a people hungry for change? The tide was turning. In May 1789, King Louis XVI called the Estates General, a rarely convened assembly representing the three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. It was a reaction to France's dire financial straits, but it unraveled a storm he never anticipated. The Third Estate, representing the vast majority of the population, arrived with a burning desire for change. The atmosphere crackled with tension. The Third Estate voiced their grievances, demanding more power and representation. On June 17, 1789, they took a bold step. They declared themselves the National Assembly, signifying a seismic shift in the power dynamics of France. The king, caught flat-footed, attempted to reassert control. He locked them out of their meeting place, but the seeds of revolution had been planted. They refused to be silenced. On June 20, 1789, in a nearby handball court, 576 delegates vowed not to disband until they drafted a new constitution. This was the tennis court oath, a pledge of unity against oppression. Within days, the nation buzzed with the news. In a country rife with inequality, these men became symbols of hope. But hope quickly turned to anger. Paris simmered with unrest, and whispers of revolution transformed into cries for action. On July 14th, the Bastille, a fortress prison symbolizing royal tyranny, became the target of a furious mob. As dawn broke, the people stormed the Bastille, seeking arms and ammunition to defend their cause. They seized the fortress, releasing only 7 prisoners, but the message was clear: the monarchy was no longer untouchable. As news of the Bastille's fall spread, so did the revolutionary fervor. It became a rallying cry, uniting the anger of the common people against a regime that had ignored their plight for too long. The National Assembly moved quickly, fueled by popular sentiment. They abolished feudal privileges, dismantling centuries of aristocratic control. This marked a clear break from the past, a declaration that power would no longer rest solely in the hands of the privileged few. Revolutionary factions began to emerge, each one carrying its vision for France's future. The Jacobins, the Girondins, the sans-culottes. The landscape shifted. Ideas clashed as uncertainty brewed. What began as a call for reform spiraled into a power struggle between those who favored radical change and those who sought a more moderate approach. The revolution was no longer just about the king's failures. It was about shaping the very identity of a nation. Meanwhile, Louis XVI, still isolated in his gilded palace, had no clue of the storm brewing at his feet. He continued to believe that his authority would quell the insurrection. But as the days passed, public sentiment hardened against him. Rumors swirled, people whispered, and worse, they acted. The king's actions or inactions led to even greater unrest. His miscalculations pushed the Third Estate further into conflict. That singular event at the Bastille was just the beginning. Much larger forces were now at play. As factions mobilized and voices grew louder, one startling question loomed. Would the monarchy endure, or would it crumble under the weight of its own failures? The answer lay just ahead, but the stakes were rising. Louis's world was about to change forever. How far would the revolutionaries go to seize control, and would the king ever regain his power? In June 1791, the stakes reached a fever pitch when Louis XVI made a fateful decision to flee France. The royal family attempted to escape to Varennes, believing they could rally loyal supporters and ultimately retain their power. Disguised as commoners, they set out under the cover of night, a desperate bid for a second chance. The hopes of the monarchy hinged on this flight, but fate had other plans. As dawn broke, a convoy of royalists made their way through the darkened streets, but fate intervened. A simple innkeeper recognized the king, alerting the revolutionary authorities. They swiftly apprehended the family and dragged them back to Paris, right into the arms of their enemies. This failure wasn't just a misstep, it was a devastating blow that shattered any remaining illusion of authority. The flight to Varennes exposed the monarchy's precarious grip on power and revealed the depth of Louis's isolation. Upon their return, a whirlwind of accusations and scorn awaited them. The echoes of revolutionary fervor resonated through the streets. Louis was no longer seen as the divine ruler of France, but as a coward fleeing his people. The once revered king faced a dramatically shifting tide. Revolutionary sentiments swelled as more individuals began to question their loyalty. How could they trust a ruler who attempted to abandon them in their time of need? The stalwarts of the monarchy faded into the shadows, one by one. Friends turned allies turned foes. The Comte de Mirabeau, once an influential supporter, grew disillusioned with Louis's inability to adapt to the changing political landscape. Mirabeau's betrayal struck deep, his words seeping through the court like poison. He urged the National Assembly to take measures against the king, at a time when loyalty was the crown's most precious jewel. And he wasn't alone in wielding the knife of betrayal. The very advisors who had once fueled Louis's ambitions began to pivot their allegiances towards the revolution, sensing the winds of change. French citizens, once subjects living in reverence under an iron crown, now saw Louis as an obsolete relic. Papers and pamphlets circulated across Paris, painting the king as a traitor while fueling a revolutionary zeal. The growing animosity culminated in August 1792 when mobs stormed the Tuileries Palace, where Louis sought refuge. He stood there, surrounded by despair, as his people, previously his subjects, became feral, wild with rage. In September of that same year, Louis XVI was arrested in a move that sealed his fate. The National Convention convened not just as a governing body, but as the very embodiment of revolutionary justice. The former monarch was charged with treason, a stark twist on the tales of power and divine right that had shaped his reign. As Louis prepared for his trial, whispers of betrayal echoed in the halls of his once gilded palace. Would he find any ally amidst the ruins of his kingdom, or would the final threads unravel beneath the weight of his failures? The courtroom, intended to convey justice, soon transformed into a crucible, testing the essence of loyalty and truth. The former king sat, isolated and vulnerable, as history moved to deliver its judgment. What would become of Louis XVI, and would he uncover any hidden support among his former allies, or would betrayal be his only companion? The answer lay just ahead, wrapped in the impending verdict of his trial. The court was a spectacle, fraught with tension and expectation. The trial of Louis XVI commenced on December 11, 1792. A man once regarded as the divine monarch was now shackled before his own people, reduced to an object of scorn. The charges against him were grave: conspiracy against the liberty of the French people, treason against the nation he had sworn to protect. The National Convention, filled with revolutionaries seeking justice, turned into a crucible of judgment against the very essence of monarchy itself. Evidence against Louis mounted, though much of it was politically charged. The revolutionaries painted a portrait of a king who had betrayed his nation by fleeing and colluding with foreign powers. His attempts to negotiate with Austria and Prussia had backfired. His very actions threatened the revolution and thus required a severe response. But the trial was more than about justice. It was a symbolic dismantling of the monarchy's authority and an assertion of revolutionary ideals. The radicalization of the populace grew. Royalist sympathizers diminished as public opinion shifted irrevocably toward advocating for a republic. On January 15, 1793, the verdict came crashing down. Louis was found guilty of treason. His response was a mixture of disbelief and defiance. He simply stated, "I am innocent. I never wanted the downfall of my country." But declarations of innocence were futile. The whirring gears of revolution had no patience for sentiment. The revolution demanded a stark end to his reign, and it would come soon. Days later, on January 21, 1793, Louis XVI faced his final moment. The Place de la Révolution was alive with energy, an audience drawn to witness the end of the monarchy. Clad in the same clothing he wore to his execution as to his trial, the former king climbed the scaffold, now stripped of his crown and dignity. As the guillotine stood ready, he climbed to the platform, met with both cheers and jeers. He addressed the crowd, calling them Frenchmen, and urged them to be aware of their actions. His voice was steady. Yet, the crowd was not there to hear him. They were there for revenge. At 10:22 a.m., the blade fell. The monarchy ended with a heartbeat. The execution of Louis XVI sent shockwaves through France and reverberated across Europe. Monarchies trembled at the thought of a revolution spilling over their borders. The idea of a republic kindled fires of hope and terror as it reshaped the geopolitical landscape. Was France now destined to be the crucible of change, or would chaos ensue in the shadow of this radical shift? In the aftermath, opinions about Louis XVI began to crystallize. He became a martyr for royalists and a symbol of tyranny for revolutionaries. His execution marked a definitive end to absolute monarchy in France. But the revolution, while heralded as a beacon of hope, was also spiraling into a deeper chasm of violence and extremism. What would this violence give rise to? Would the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity survive the storm? As the new leaders of France grappled with their triumph, a question loomed large. Was the death of a king truly the birth of freedom, or merely the start of a darker era?